He only wanted a simple sandwich. But the moment Keanu Reeves stepped into his own diner in disguise, he heard two cashiers say something that froze him in place. A loyal old worker was being mocked, blamed, and quietly destroyed, and no one knew the truth. What Keanu uncovered next would shake the entire diner to its core. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sun had barely risen over the Oregon coast when Keanu Reeves stepped out of his old pickup truck and looked at the building in front of him. Harbor Light Diner, a place he once believed would stand as a small beacon of warmth for anyone who walked through its doors. A place he had built quietly, never attaching his name, never wanting credit. He thought it would run itself on kindness and community spirit, but recently whispers had reached him. Whispers he couldn't ignore. Employee turnover rising, inventory disappearing, cash register numbers not adding up, staff morale sinking. It didn't make sense. Not here. Not in the diner that had once been a second home to fishermen, truck drivers, and local families. Not in a place built on the simple idea that good food and good hearts could still make a difference. Keanu adjusted the brim of his faded baseball cap, the disguise hiding most of his face. He wore a flannel shirt with frayed sleeves, jeans worn thin at the knees, and boots that carried the dust of a dozen road trips. He had added a rough layer of stubble enough to blend in without attracting attention. Today, he didn't come as Keanu Reeves, the actor. He came as a concerned owner looking for the truth. The diner sign flickered gently in the morning breeze. Harbor Light Diner. Open 24 hours. Home-style meals. Friendly service. The words felt heavier than they used to. Keanu pushed the door open. A soft chime rang above him, a cheerful sound he remembered choosing himself during the renovation. But instead of lifting his spirits, the chime blended into an undercurrent of tension he couldn't quite name. The diner looked lively on the surface. Families gathered around booths, kids laughing as they drowned syrup-soaked pancakes. Fishermen in thick jackets sat near the windows, warming their hands around steaming mugs of coffee. A group of truckers chatted about the weather, their voices bouncing off the ocean blue tiles that lined the walls. The familiar salty scent from the coast drifted in every time the door opened. Everything seemed normal. Almost too normal. Keanu chose a seat at the far end of the counter, a spot that offered a wide view of the entire diner. He scanned the room slowly. The framed photos of the coastline were still on the walls, each one capturing the rugged beauty of Oregon's shores. Polaroids of smiling customers hung near the kitchen window. He recognized some of them. He'd taken a few himself, but the feeling in the air wasn't the same. Something sat beneath the noise, like a song played slightly off-key. It didn't take long for him to notice Riley and Tessa. They were behind the register, leaning against the counter instead of working. Riley, tall and lean, with a perpetual smirk, flicked a pen between his fingers while whispering something to Tessa. She snorted loudly, her tone sharp, her smile cruel. Their eyes drifted toward an older man who stood by the dish pit. Frank, late 60s, gray hair, a limp that made every step careful and deliberate. But even with the limp, he worked faster than most people half his age. His hands moved with quiet rhythm, his focus unbroken. He scraped plates, rinsed them, stacked them, wiped counters, and cleared tables whenever the servers needed help. He carried himself with a gentleness that felt out of place beside the harsh whispers coming from the register. Tessa nudged Riley and pointed at Frank. Riley rolled his eyes dramatically. "Look at him," he muttered, just loud enough for Keanu to hear. "Guy should have retired before I was even born," Tessa smirked. "If he slows down anymore, we'll have to roll him out of here." Keanu's jaw tightened beneath the scruff of his beard. He had come here expecting problems, but not cruelty. Not this. He forced himself to stay calm as a waitress approached. He ordered a simple tuna melt and a black coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. As he waited, he watched Riley shortchange a teenager paying for a breakfast sandwich. He watched Tessa roll her eyes at a single mother counting coins to cover her bill. He watched Frank rush to help a young server who dropped a tray, kneeling down despite the pain in his leg. No one thanked him. Keanu's heart sank. This diner was meant to be a sanctuary. Something was broken, and today he intended to find out why. Keanu wrapped his hands around the warm coffee mug, letting the heat steady him while he continued watching the room. The surface of the diner still looked calm, but now that he had seen Riley and Tessa clearly, the tension underneath was impossible to ignore. They were the kind of employees who behaved differently when they thought no one important was watching. The kind who could poison an entire workplace with subtle cruelty. Frank, on the other hand, worked with a quiet dignity that didn't match the way they treated him. Keanu watched him lift a stack of heavy plates, his hands trembling slightly from strain. He paused for a moment to rub his knee, as if the long shift was already wearing on him. Still, he didn't complain. He didn't even slow down. He just kept moving steady and gentle, as if helping others was the only thing that mattered. Riley's voice cut through the air, again sharper this time. "Are you kidding me? Another wrong order. Marina needs to get her act together." He said it loudly on purpose, making sure the young waitress could hear. She stiffened, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Frank stepped in without hesitation, speaking softly to Marina as he helped her remake the plate. His voice steadied her, but the tremble in her hands remained. Keanu's eyes slid back to the cash register just in time to catch Riley palming a few coins from the tip cup. Tessa saw it too. Instead of reacting with anger or surprise, she gave him a small nod as if this had become routine. It hit Keanu then. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a pattern, a culture, a slow erosion of the values he built this place on. His tuna melt arrived, and he took a small bite, mostly to maintain the appearance of an ordinary customer. But his attention never left the staff. Every sigh from Marina, every wince from Frank, every whisper between Riley and Tessa pulled him deeper into the realization that the diner he trusted was slipping away. Whatever was happening here was bigger than he imagined, and the truth would not uncover itself. Keanu took another sip of his coffee, letting its bitterness settle while he studied every corner of the diner. He could feel something shifting beneath the surface, as if the place was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit anymore. The laughter from the booths sounded thinner. The smiles from the servers felt forced. Even the clatter of dishes in the kitchen carried a strain he couldn't ignore. Frank moved toward a table where an older couple struggled to stand. He placed a steady hand on the edge of their booth, offering balance, without making them feel helpless. They thanked him warmly. Frank smiled back, but it was faint, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated. Riley watched the exchange and snickered. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Guy acts like he owns the place." Keanu's stomach tightened at the irony. If only Riley knew who actually did. Tessa leaned against the register, tapping her fingernails impatiently. "Wish he'd finally quit," she said under her breath. "Would make everyone's life easier." Keanu felt a chill run through him. It wasn't just disrespect, it was resentment. The kind that grows when someone decent makes the selfish look small without trying. A server passed by with a loaded tray. One wobble, one misstep. The tray tipped plates, crashing onto the floor in an explosion of noise. The entire diner fell silent for a heartbeat. Before anyone reacted, Frank was there, kneeling despite the pain in his leg. He picked up the shards with careful hands. The server whispered an apology, but Frank shook his head gently. "It's all right. Happens to the best of us." Riley groaned loudly. "Great. More delays." Keanu watched the scene unfold, a sinking certainty growing in his chest. Something was very wrong here, and today he would find out how deep it went. Keanu took another quiet bite of his tuna melt, trying to look like just another traveler stopping for breakfast. But every second that passed only deepened his suspicion that Harbor Light Diner was running on a surface-level charm, masking something far more unsettling. The kind of problem that didn't show up in financial reports or neatly written emails. The kind of problem you could only see by sitting in the middle of it. Linda, the diner's manager, hurried past him with a clipboard stacked so high it looked ready to collapse. Papers stuck out at awkward angles, and her headset buzzed non-stop as the kitchen cooks tried to get her attention. She attempted to answer 3 questions at once, her voice wavering, her patience thinning. Keanu could see the exhaustion in the way her shoulders slumped as if she hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. Riley and Tessa were not helping. "Linda looks like she's about to explode," Riley muttered loud enough for nearby tables to hear. He popped a piece of gum into his mouth as if he had nothing better to do. Tessa scoffed. "This place is falling apart. Honestly, I'm just waiting for someone to finally close it down." They laughed together as if the slow decay of the diner was some private joke, instead of a real problem affecting real people. Linda called out for them to stock more cups. They ignored her completely. Keanu watched them carefully. Their attitude wasn't laziness, it was disrespect, the kind that came from feeling untouchable. Before he could analyze further, a loud crash echoed through the diner. A mug had slipped from a server's hand and shattered across the floor. Hot coffee splashed toward the feet of a startled customer. The server gasped, but Frank was already moving. Keanu didn't even see him react. One moment he was wiping a counter. The next, he was at the scene on one knee, his limp worsening under the sudden movement. "I'm so sorry," Frank said, gently using a towel to protect the customer's shoes from the spill. "Let me clean this right away." He moved slowly but with purpose, brushing the ceramic pieces into a small dustpan while keeping his body between the shards and the customer's legs. The customer tried to apologize to Frank for causing trouble. Frank shook his head and smiled softly, as if these moments were just part of the service he was proud to give. Riley watched from behind the register and smirked. "Grandpa Hero, to the rescue," he said under his breath. Tessa laughed. "He's going to throw out his back one of these days." Keanu felt a tightness build in his chest. It wasn't just cruelty, it was targeted cruelty, consistent, intentional. And because no one else seemed to notice or care, Riley and Tessa had grown comfortable enough to let their real attitudes show. Keanu decided to speak up without revealing himself. "Frank been here long?" he asked casually. Tessa turned, eyeing him without interest. "Too long. Should have retired ages ago." "He slows us down," she said flatly. Keanu sipped his coffee to hide the anger rising inside him. If she only knew how much Frank held this place together. But the day wasn't done, showing him how deep the problem went. Keanu kept his expression neutral as he lowered his coffee mug. Inside, though, his temper tightened like a knot. He had been in enough workplaces, enough film sets, enough human spaces to recognize the difference between stress and cruelty, between people who were overwhelmed and people who simply didn't care. Riley and Tessa weren't tired. They weren't under pressure. They were enjoying the decay they were creating. As the diner buzzed around them, Riley leaned casually against the counter and pretended to look busy while his hand slid across the surface. Keanu caught the subtle movement, the way Riley's fingers brushed across a folded $5 bill left as a tip. Riley slipped it smoothly into his pocket, then straightened up with the same practiced confidence of someone who had done it many times before. Keanu's jaw tightened beneath his disguise. If he had looked away even a second, he would have missed it. No wonder the cash register numbers never balanced. On the other side of the counter, Tessa rang up a distracted father juggling two small kids. The man looked exhausted, one hand holding a diaper bag, and the other steadying a fussy toddler. He barely noticed when Tessa gave him too little change back. The error wasn't even close, it was deliberate. Tessa slid an extra dollar into her apron while maintaining a bright, innocent smile for the customer. Keanu's heart pounded heavier. This wasn't mismanagement. This was exploitation. Little cuts that bled the business and its customers dry. Meanwhile, Frank continued moving through the diner unnoticed by almost everyone except Keanu. A young boy spilled a cup of orange juice near the window booth. The kid froze, staring at the spreading puddle with panic in his eyes. Before his mother could apologize, Frank appeared like a quiet guardian. He knelt beside the child, ignoring the pain that crossed his face when his knee hit the floor. "Don't worry at all," Frank said gently. "Happens to the best of us." He handed the boy a napkin. "Here, you can help me. Teamwork makes the job faster." The boy grinned, helping dab the table while Frank worked on the floor. When they finished, the boy gave Frank a spontaneous hug. Frank patted his back softly, as if the gesture healed something in him. Riley looked over, rolling his eyes. "Give me a break," he muttered. "Old guy's trying to be everyone's grandfather." Tessa snorted. Yeah, maybe he should go home and bake cookies instead of dragging us down. Keanu didn't move, didn't speak. He only watched. He reached for his wallet as if searching for something, but really, he wanted an excuse to look down, breathe, and keep himself composed. He couldn't blow his cover yet, not until he understood everything. But then the moment came, the one that pierced right through him. Riley flicked a coin across the counter. It arced through the air, spinning as it clattered toward Frank's feet. "Hey, old-timer," Riley said smugly. "Try not to drop it." Frank didn't react at first. He just stood still, stunned, the coin rolling to a stop against his shoe. Then he slowly bent down to pick it up, pain showing plainly in the tight line of his jaw. No one in the diner said a word. No one stood up for him. No one even noticed. But Keanu did, and the silence around that moment told him everything he needed to know. Frank slipped the coin into his pocket as if trying to hide the humiliation, then returned to wiping down a table that didn't even need cleaning. His movements were slower now, heavier, as though Riley's cheap insult weighed on his shoulders more than any tray or stack of dishes ever had. Keanu watched closely, noticing the slight tremor in Frank's hands and the way his eyes stayed focused on the table, avoiding everyone. Riley didn't care. Tessa didn't care. And no one else even saw. Keanu took a steadying breath, trying to keep the anger from showing on his face. It wasn't time yet. He needed to observe, to understand the full scope of what had gone wrong under his nose. Still, the urge to stand up and confront the two cashiers tugged at him with every passing second. Linda rushed past again, nearly dropping her clipboard this time. The stress in her voice carried across the room as she tried desperately to organize orders and calm an irritated customer at the same time. She looked alone in a battlefield she didn't deserve. Keanu wondered how much she had seen, and how much she had simply learned to tolerate in order to survive the day. He turned his attention back to Frank. The old man moved toward the sink, rubbing his lower back discreetly when he thought no one was watching. He filled a bin with water and soap, dunked plates into it, and kept working without pause. His dedication should have earned respect. Instead, he was treated like an inconvenience. Keanu pushed his empty plate forward, pretending as though he were ready for the check. But inside, he was taking inventory of something far more important than his meal. Riley stealing tips, Tessa shortchanging customers, both of them tormenting the kindest man in the room, and the rest of the diner oblivious to it all. The truth was beginning to take shape, dark and undeniable. Something here was broken, not because of the customers or the food or even the long hours. It was broken because good people were being crushed in silence. And Keanu knew this was only the beginning. The morning rush began to thin, leaving a quieter rhythm in the diner. Plates clinked softly, a coffee pot hissed somewhere near the kitchen, and the scent of grilled butter hung in the air. Keanu waited until Riley and Tessa were distracted at the register before sliding off his stool. He walked toward the back counter near the dish pit, pretending to inspect a rack of desserts as customers shuffled out the door. Frank was wiping down a metal prep table, his shoulders hunched, his back slightly twisted from years of strain. He didn't notice Keanu at first. His hands shook as he wrung out a towel, the tremor subtle but steady. Keanu watched for a moment, seeing pain woven into even the smallest movements. Arthritis, age, exhaustion. Yet there was no complaint, no resentment, just quiet work. Keanu stepped closer and made sure his boots scuffed the tile so he wouldn't startle him. "Sorry about that," Keanu said as he brushed lightly against Frank's arm, pretending it was an accident. Frank looked up quickly, startled, then relaxed when he saw the harmless-looking stranger in the worn cap and flannel shirt. "Oh, no trouble," he said, offering a tired smile. "Should have been watching where I was going." Keanu returned the smile and nodded toward the sink. "Looks like a busy morning." Frank chuckled softly as he folded the towel. "It usually is. Breakfast crowd keeps us on our toes." Up close, Keanu could see the deep lines etched into the older man's face. Lines not just from age, but from years of carrying more than one person should. Still, Frank's eyes held a warmth that struck Keanu immediately. A steady kindness, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. "You've been here a while?" Keanu asked casually. Frank nodded. 9 years. Feels like longer, though, in a good way. He set a stack of plates aside and moved to rinse another. This place became home after my wife passed. Gave me something to wake up for. Keanu swallowed gently, the words reaching deeper than he expected. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. Frank's smile turned fragile. It was. Still is some days. She was my whole world. He paused, letting the memory soften his expression. Cancer took her quicker than we were ready for. Keanu lowered his gaze respectfully. He didn't want to push, but Frank continued anyway, almost as if speaking helped lighten the weight he carried. Bills piled up, Frank said quietly. We used everything we had. I sold our house after she passed. Couldn't keep it going alone. So now I rent a little room out back. Not much, but it's enough for me. Keanu felt something inside him break a little. You have family, Keanu asked gently. Frank nodded. A daughter. Emily. She's grown but has some challenges. Needs support. I help whenever I can. That's why I take extra shifts. He tried to smile again. Retiring's not really an option for me. Besides, working keeps me moving. Keanu could hear the strain behind the words, the financial pressure, the emotional burden, the loneliness. Yet Frank still spoke with gratitude, not bitterness. I'm grateful I can still work, he said simply. Life hasn't been easy, but it still gives me purpose. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He wasn't sure whether to admire the man's resilience or mourn that someone so loyal had been left to struggle alone. But Frank wasn't finished. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a small confession. Things here, they're not the same lately, he said. Some folks changed. His eyes flicked briefly toward the front counter where Riley and Tessa stood whispering again. But the customers keep me going. Good people still come through those doors. That's enough for me. Keanu nodded slowly. It wasn't enough for him. Keanu remained beside the back counter, pretending to examine a stack of dessert pies, while watching the way Frank's shoulders shifted under the weight of his quiet admission. There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, just a tired acceptance from a man who had seen too much change and had learned to endure rather than complain. It was the kind of humility that made Keanu's chest fold inward. People changed, huh? Keanu asked, carefully keeping his tone light, as if he were making passing conversation. He didn't want to scare Frank into silence. He wanted him to feel safe enough to speak. Frank nodded, wiping down another section of the counter. Some folks don't see this place like they used to. Used to feel more like a family, everyone pulling their weight, looking out for each other. He paused, his brow tightening for a moment. Lately, it's different. Feels colder. Keanu followed his gaze without moving his head. Riley and Tessa were still by the register, whispering and glancing over their shoulders, clearly talking about someone. Their posture was stiff defensive, the way people looked when they sensed they were being watched or judged. Is it them? Keanu asked softly. Frank hesitated, then shook his head. Everyone's got their own struggles. I don't blame anyone. His words were kind, but the truth bled through the cracks. He wasn't denying that Riley and Tessa were the problem. He was simply too gentle to say it outright. Keanu could see it. Frank had been mistreated for so long that he had learned to shield others from blame, even the ones hurting him. You deserve better support, Keanu said gently. You do a lot around here. Frank chuckled with a low, almost embarrassed sound. Well, someone's got to keep the wheels turning. The young folks are busy, and Linda's got more on her plate than she can handle. I'm just happy to help. Keanu wanted to tell him that wasn't how it should be, that no man should have to carry an entire diner on his shoulders while being mocked behind his back. But he kept his thoughts to himself for now. Frank rinsed another plate, his stiff fingers gripping the edges with care. You know, he added quietly, Emily, my daughter, she always tells me I should slow down, says I'm working too hard. His smile softened again, but I want her to have as much independence as possible. She's doing well, but she still needs me. Keanu nodded with full sincerity. Sounds like you're a good father. Frank's eyes glimmered with warmth and sadness intertwined. I try. Life didn't turn out the way any of us planned, but she's my pride. For a moment, silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that forms between two people who unexpectedly understand each other. Then from across the room, Riley's voice cut through the space. "Look at this," Riley muttered to Tessa, pointing discreetly toward Frank. Grandpa found himself a new buddy. Tessa snorted, crossing her arms. Maybe he's hoping someone will finally feel sorry for him. Frank's shoulders stiffened for a split second, just enough for Keanu to notice, though Frank tried hard to pretend he didn't hear them. He straightened up and reached for another stack of dishes. Keanu's stomach tightened. The hostility coming from the two cashiers wasn't subtle anymore. It was directed, intentional, and meant to break someone who had done nothing but work himself to the bone for this place. Before walking away, Keanu gave Frank a small, reassuring nod. "You were doing good work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Frank looked up, almost surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Some days that's nice to hear." Keanu turned, but inside something was shifting. This wasn't just a diner problem anymore. It was a human one. Keanu lingered near the prep counter for another moment, pretending to adjust his jacket while watching Frank return to his work. The older man settled into his routine again, but the quiet heaviness in his movements hadn't been there earlier. Riley's mocking tone had chipped something inside him, even if he tried to hide it. Frank kept his head low as he loaded another rack of dishes, his limp more noticeable now that fatigue had set in. Still, he hummed softly under his breath, as if reminding himself to stay steady. He didn't look toward the cashiers, didn't defend himself, didn't react. It was the kind of silence that came from years of swallowing words that would never change anything. Keanu watched the scene with a growing clarity. Frank wasn't weak. He wasn't slow. He wasn't the problem. He was simply a man who had spent his whole life giving more than he received, working harder than anyone noticed, holding on to a sense of dignity, even when others tried to steal it from him. From the register, Riley and Tessa whispered again, their eyes darting toward the back. Not with concern, with irritation, with resentment. Frank didn't see it, but Keanu did, and the realization stayed with him like a stone in his chest. The quiet lull of mid-morning didn't last long. By noon, Harbor Light Diner transformed into a swirling storm of noise and motion. The lunch rush hit fast, filling every booth and bar stool with hungry customers. Plates clattered, coffee poured nonstop, and the kitchen bell never seemed to stop ringing. It was the kind of organized chaos Keanu remembered from the early days, but today it felt different, sharper, and more fragile. Marina, the youngest waitress on the floor, darted between tables with a nervous energy that made her movements shaky. Her ponytail bounced as she rushed to deliver plates and refill drinks, but she was clearly overwhelmed. The diner had far more customers than she could handle alone, especially with Riley and Tessa refusing to help. A man in a business suit snapped his fingers sharply. "Hey," he barked. "I said no onions. Are you even paying attention?" Marina froze mid-step, the color draining from her face. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling. I can have it remade right away." The man wasn't satisfied. His frustration spilled out in a raised voice that echoed through the diner. "Do your job right. It's not complicated." Heads turned. Conversations paused. Marina stood there shrinking under the weight of public scolding. Keanu watched from his seat, his jaw tightening. Riley and Tessa weren't just ignoring the problem. They were both leaning against the counter, scrolling on their phones without a hint of awareness. They didn't glance up. They didn't help. They didn't care. But Frank heard the commotion. He always did. Without hesitation, he moved as quickly as his aching leg allowed. He stepped between Marina and the furious customer, placing himself subtly in the middle so Marina could slip away without further humiliation. Sir Frank said gently, "I'm sorry about that. Let me take care of it. I'll have the kitchen remake your meal right away, and I'll brew a fresh pot of coffee for you on the house." The man paused, taken aback by the sincerity in Frank's voice. His shoulders dropped slightly. The tension eased just enough for him to nod, muttering, "Fine. Just make sure it's right this time." Frank offered a reassuring smile, then turned toward the kitchen, calling out the corrected order himself. Marina exhaled shakily and pressed a hand to her chest. The moment Frank returned to her side, she whispered, "Thank you, Frank. I wouldn't survive here without you." Frank touched her arm lightly. "You're doing fine. Bad moments don't define you." Keanu watched the exchange with deep respect. Frank wasn't just a dishwasher, he was the quiet backbone of this diner, the one who held others up when they couldn't stand on their own. But instead of gratitude, he received resentment. Riley's eyes narrowed as he watched Frank comfort Marina. His lip curled into a smirk. "Look at him," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the counter. "Frank just wants attention. Bet he's the one messing with the register, too." Keanu's head snapped toward him. The seeds of accusation were already sprouting. Riley didn't even try to hide it. And then it got worse. Just as Keanu processed the cruel remark, he caught Tessa sliding her hand subtly toward the tip jar. She waited until a customer turned away, then plucked a folded dollar bill from the pile and tucked it smoothly into her apron. That was it. Keanu felt his stomach drop as the truth clicked into place. The problem wasn't the diner. It wasn't the customers. It wasn't even the growing pressure of busy shifts. It was these two employees shifting blame, poisoning the atmosphere, and targeting the one man who kept everything from falling apart. And Keanu knew this lunch rush was only the beginning. The chaos of the lunch rush continued to swell, pressing against every corner of the diner like a rising tide. Keanu stayed seated, but his senses sharpened, watching how each piece of the environment moved or failed to move together. The rhythm was off. The teamwork was missing. The only person keeping the place from collapsing was the same man Riley and Tessa kept trying to chip away at. Frank carried the remade plate to the business customer, who accepted it with a gruff nod. Frank apologized again and topped off the man's coffee, keeping his voice gentle and steady. Marina noticed and hurried over, still shaken but improving under Frank's reassuring presence. "You really saved me back there," Marina whispered as she handed Frank an extra napkin for the spill. "I don't know what I'd do without you around." "I'm just doing my part," Frank said with a soft smile. "You keep going. You're doing good." Marina bit her lip, emotion flickering in her expression. Then she hurried off to another table, her shoulders a little straighter. Keanu watched Riley sneer at the interaction. "Unbelievable," Riley muttered, pretending to polish the counter. "He thinks he's everybody's savior." Tessa crossed her arms. "Just wait. Linda's going to figure out he's the problem. I'm telling you, the drawer's off because of him." Keanu felt heat rising in his chest. He had seen enough. But Frank didn't react to the whispering. He moved to wipe down a booth where a young mother struggled to cut food for her two toddlers. She looked overwhelmed, and Frank instinctively stepped in. "You need a hand?" he asked. Gently. She hesitated, embarrassed, but he nodded encouragingly. He carried over two smaller plates, cut the food into toddler-sized bites, and set everything up so the kids could eat more easily. The mother's relief washed across her face. "Thank you," she breathed. "You're an angel." Frank shook his head softly. "Just here to help." Riley rolled his eyes so dramatically that even customers noticed. "There he goes again," Riley said under his breath. "Acting like he owns the place." Keanu nearly choked on his coffee. The irony cut like glass. Linda rushed past again, juggling stacks of order slips. She tried to catch Riley's attention. "Can one of you refill the drink station?" she called out. Tessa didn't lift her head from her phone. "Busy," she snapped. Linda blinked in frustration, then repeated the request. "We need it now. Half the pitchers are empty." Riley shrugged. "Not my job," he said, though it clearly was. Linda opened her mouth as if to argue, but seemed too overwhelmed to continue. She turned away, muttering under her breath, and hurried toward the kitchen. Keanu watched her retreat, seeing how the exhaustion dragged on her features. A manager shouldn't be running on fumes. A manager shouldn't feel like a one-woman army. But with Riley and Tessa constantly dodging responsibility, she had little choice. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from near the entrance. A man accidentally knocked over a metal tray while shuffling toward the door. Plates tumbled, silverware scattered, and several customers jumped. Frank moved before anyone else could even register the sound. He grabbed a towel and a broom, his limp more pronounced, but his urgency unwavering. He crouched low to gather the fallen utensils, wincing slightly as his knees hit the floor. "Sorry about that, folks," Frank said, smiling up at the startled customers. "We'll have this cleaned up in no time." The man apologized profusely, but Frank waved it off kindly. Keanu watched this and felt something click inside him. Frank was the heartbeat of the diner, the one everyone relied on without realizing it. Yet he was the one being punished, mocked, and targeted. Riley leaned against the register, flicking a straw wrapper across the counter. "Look at him," he said loudly. "Trying so hard. Bet he's covering up something." Tessa smirked. "Wouldn't surprise me." Their voices carried far enough that Marina flinched. Keanu didn't move, but inside a storm was beginning to form. What he had witnessed wasn't just mismanagement or laziness, it was the early stages of a coordinated attempt to push Frank out. And Keanu wasn't going to let that happen. Frank finished sweeping the last of the scattered silverware, breathing harder than before, but still offering a polite nod to the customer. No one applauded him. No one thanked him, except Marina, who whispered another quiet, "You're a lifesaver." Riley stared at Frank with open annoyance, then muttered to Tessa, "Watch. Linda's going to blame us when the register comes up short. We should have never let him near it." Tessa nodded, her smirk sharpening. Time to let the old man fall. Keanu's jaw tightened. He had all the proof he needed. The lunch rush thinned into a quieter hum, but Keanu didn't move from his seat. He adjusted his disguise, unfolded a newspaper he had no intention of reading, and settled in for a long afternoon. If Harbor Light Diner was broken today would reveal how deep the cracks went. He needed to see everything with his own eyes. From behind the paper, his gaze followed Riley as he returned to the register. A middle-aged woman wearing a raincoat stepped forward with a simple order, 2 soups and a side salad. Riley typed on the screen with exaggerated laziness, pressing the wrong buttons 3 times. He sighed loudly as if the system were malfunctioning, but Keanu could see his fingers clearly. The mistakes weren't accidents, they were intentional. The woman paid, thanked him, and walked away, unaware that she had been charged extra. Riley smirked, tapping the drawer shut with his hip. A few minutes later, a tourist couple approached. They ordered sandwiches and drinks. Tessa punched in only 1 item, then leaned on the counter while chatting as if nothing was wrong. When the couple paid and walked off, she slipped the extra bills behind the register, hidden near a stack of paper receipts. Keanu's grip on the newspaper tightened. 2 customers undercharged, 1 overcharged. The register now showed numbers that didn't match reality. Every move Riley and Tessa made pushed the drawer closer to chaos, and every mistake would eventually land on someone weaker. Marina, carrying a tray heavy with plates, took too sharp a turn and stumbled. 1 fork slid off and clattered against the floor. Before she could pick it up, Tessa rolled her eyes and muttered loudly, "Unbelievable. Can't anyone here do their job?" Marina's cheeks flushed a deep red. She bent down quickly, apologizing to no one in particular. After she picked up the fork and hurried away, Riley shook his head as if disappointed. "She's a walking disaster," he said, his voice carrying across the diner. "No wonder the drawers are always short. Mistakes everywhere." Keanu lowered the newspaper enough to study their faces. That wasn't just a stray comment. It was a rehearsed line, something they had likely said many times before. A narrative they were building. A trap they were setting. Frank emerged from the kitchen carrying a stack of clean plates. His limp was more pronounced now, and the weight of the plates made his shoulders tense. He set them down at the prep station, wiped his hands, and moved to refill the water pitchers without being asked. Every action he took was efficient, thoughtful, and timed perfectly with the needs of the diner. But as the register drawer pinged open again, Riley shot Frank a glare sharp enough to cut. Tessa followed his gaze with narrowed eyes, as if Frank's simple presence was an inconvenience. Linda finally stepped out of the back office, looking as though she had aged 5 years in the last 5 hours. Her clipboard was balanced against her chest, covered in scribbled notes and receipt tapes. She looked at Riley, then at the register, her brows pulling together. "That's the second shortage this week," Linda said, rubbing her forehead. "Something isn't adding up." Riley didn't hesitate. "Ask Frank," he said immediately. "He's always wandering near the counter." Keanu felt the air shift. Marina froze mid-step. Tessa didn't blink. Frank looked up slowly, stunned. "I don't touch the register," he said quietly. "I only help customers when—" "You're always around it," Riley cut in. "Just saying." Linda hesitated. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't defend Frank either. She was tired, overwhelmed, and the math kept pointing toward the wrong person. Frank swallowed hard. Panic flickered behind his eyes. "I'm sorry if there was any confusion," he said, even though he'd done nothing but work himself to exhaustion. Keanu felt his heart twist. This was no longer small cruelty. This was deliberate. This was a setup, and he needed proof before it crushed the one man keeping this diner alive. Frank stood frozen for a moment as if the accusation had knocked the breath out of him. His fingers tightened slightly around the dish towel he held, the fabric twisting in his trembling hands. He opened his mouth as if to explain further, but no words came. The quiet humiliation settled across his shoulders like a heavy coat. Keanu eased the newspaper onto his lap and watched the tension ripple through the diner. Marina glanced anxiously between Riley, Tessa, and Frank, but she said nothing. She looked scared of losing her job, scared of being targeted next, scared of speaking up in a place where truth didn't seem to matter anymore. Linda stepped closer to the register. She tapped through the transactions, comparing digital receipts with the total in the drawer. Each number pulled her features tighter. Another discrepancy, she whispered. $40 missing this time. Tessa let out a dramatic sigh. "This is exactly what I've been saying. Things were fine until someone started helping customers at the counter." The implication was sharp, unmistakable. Frank took a shaky breath. "I only step in when someone's upset or needs help," he said softly. "That's all. I never touch the cash." Riley shrugged with false innocence. "People forget things. Mistakes happen, even to older folks." Frank's face fell at the subtle cruelty. Keanu's jaw tightened. He watched Riley lean one elbow on the counter, spinning the register key lazily between his fingers. The move was casual, but to someone who had spent years observing people, every twitch, every habit, every hidden intention, Keanu recognized it as a display of control. Riley enjoyed having access to the drawer, enjoyed the power, enjoyed knowing he could shift blame, and Linda would be too exhausted to challenge him. A new customer stepped up to the counter, a teen girl wearing a backpack decorated with buttons. She ordered a milkshake and fries. Tessa rang up the order with the same apathy she applied to everything. When the girl set a $5 bill on the counter, Tessa quickly slid it halfway beneath a newspaper someone had left behind. She gave the girl her change short by $1. The girl didn't notice. She smiled, politely whispered a thank you, and left. As soon as she turned away, Tessa snatched the hidden bill and tucked it into her apron pocket. Keanu saw everything. 2 minutes later, a father with 2 little boys stepped up. Riley handled the transaction, joking with the boys about the ketchup dispenser. He took their cash, opened the drawer, and gestured toward a menu item as a distraction. When the father looked away, Riley slipped a single dollar behind the stack of receipt paper, exactly where Keanu had seen Tessa hide hers earlier. The pattern was obvious. Slick, practice quiet, completely coordinated. Frank never even passed near the register. Marina walked up, visibly tense. "Linda, do you want me to recheck the freezer inventory?" she asked. "We had a few items," Riley cut her off loudly. "Maybe focus on not dropping things first." Marina shrank back. She murmured, "Sorry," and hurried away. Tessa laughed under her breath. "She's hopeless." Frank stepped in front of Marina, blocking Tessa's view. "You're doing fine," he whispered, offering her a small, steady smile. "Don't let them shake you." Marina's eyes softened with relief. She nodded and hurried toward the kitchen. Behind her, Riley watched Frank walk away and muttered to Tessa, "Hero act again." Tessa smirked. "Won't matter soon." Linda's almost convinced. The certainty in her voice sent a chill down Keanu's spine. These two weren't careless. They weren't sloppy. They weren't struggling employees making small mistakes. They had a plan. They were building a case, and Frank was the target. Keanu leaned back in his booth, his heartbeat steady but fierce. This went deeper than disrespect. This was sabotage. This was theft. This was cruelty aimed at a man who could barely stand straight after hours on his feet. If Keanu didn't step in soon, Frank would be blamed, fired, and left with nothing. He opened the newspaper again, not to read, but to hide the expression forming on his face. He knew exactly what he had to do next. Keanu kept his eyes on the register as Riley and Tessa drifted away, whispering like conspirators who believed the game was already won. Frank, meanwhile, wiped down a table with slow, tired movements, unaware of the storm forming around him. Linda rubbed her forehead, clearly leaning toward the wrong conclusion. One more push and Frank would be blamed for everything. Keanu folded his newspaper and set it aside, his decision made. He couldn't wait for the truth to surface on its own. If he didn't act now, Frank's life would collapse. So, Keanu began forming a plan. Keanu stayed in his booth pretending to study the newspaper headlines while his mind worked through everything he had witnessed. Riley's lies, Tessa's theft, Frank's quiet suffering, Linda's uncertainty. The diner's entire atmosphere now felt like a fragile glass window rattling against a storm. One hit, and someone like Frank would pay the price. He had just folded the corner of the paper down when someone slid into the seat beside him. A heavy coat rustled, smelling faintly of seawater and engine oil. Keanu glanced up and saw a broad-shouldered fisherman with windburned cheeks and a thick gray beard. His flannel shirt bore the name Gordon, stitched in fading letters. "Mind if I sit?" Gordon asked. "Nowhere else open." Keanu nodded politely. "Go ahead." Gordon settled in with a groan, stretching out sore muscles. He waved down Marina for a cup of black coffee. When she walked away, he exhaled long and slow, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "That old man still here?" Gordon asked after a moment. Keanu followed his gaze. Frank was wiping down the soda machine with careful strokes, moving slowly but with his usual dedication. "You know him?" Keanu asked casually. Gordon gave a short laugh. "Know him? That man saved my daughter once." Keanu's attention sharpened. "Saved her?" "3 summers ago," Gordon said. "She was 15 then. Came in here after a beach cleanup shift. Hot day. She gets lightheaded sometimes if she's been working too long without eating enough. Fainted, right out there by the door." He pointed toward the entrance where a small bell jingled faintly each time a customer came or left. Frank saw her go down, picked her up like she weighed nothing, carried her inside, and called the ambulance. Stayed with her the whole time we were driving down from the docks. Gordon paused, his voice thickening with gratitude. Never left her side, not even when the paramedics came. Keanu felt something tighten in his throat. That sounded exactly like Frank. "Is she okay now?" he asked. "She's fine," Gordon replied with a smile. "Thinks the world of him. Draws him a little thank you card every Christmas. Man keeps every one." Keanu swallowed hard. Frank didn't just work here. He quietly held pieces of this community together. Gordon leaned closer, lowering his voice. "He's hurting these days, though." Keanu's brows drew together, hurting. "Rent went up on those tiny rooms behind the diner. Medical bills, too," Gordon said. "He's been working more hours just to keep his head above water, but he still helps everyone. Never asks for a thing." Keanu watched Frank carefully. The older man's limp was more noticeable now. He winced each time he bent down, but he never slowed his pace. "Does anyone else know about all that?" Keanu asked. "People know," Gordon said, "but folks are busy trying to survive their own troubles. And Frank, he never asks for help. That's the problem." Keanu nodded slowly. Gordon took a long sip of his coffee, then spoke the words that twisted a knife deeper into Keanu's chest. "But those 2 cashiers treat him like trash. Makes my blood boil every time. Wish the owner would see it." Keanu stared at the table. He was the owner, and he hadn't seen any of this until now. Gordon's comment lingered in the air, settling into the silence of the booth like an accusation that hit far too close to home. Keanu kept his head slightly bowed, as though he were still reading the newspaper, but inside guilt pressed against his ribs. Harbor Light Diner was supposed to be a safe place. A warm place. A place where good people like Frank could work with dignity. He had built it with that intention, but he had stepped away, let the place run itself, trusted the wrong people. And now Frank, who had carried other people's burdens for nearly a decade, was being pushed toward the edge. Gordon took another slow sip of his coffee. You ever watch how the customers treat him? He asked. Kids adore him, old folks rely on him. New people who come in nervous, he settles them, makes them feel welcome. Keanu nodded lightly. I've noticed. Thing is, Gordon continued, Frank's one of those men who's been dealt a tough hand his whole life. Wife got sick, daughter needs support. Bills never stop coming, but he still shows up, still gives what he can, even when he shouldn't have to. Keanu looked toward Frank again. The older man was leaning over the condiment station, now refilling napkins and wiping stray ketchup smudges. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. But the way he moved, steady, patient, determined, showed a quiet resilience that struck Keanu deeply. He doesn't complain, Keanu asked. Gordon shook his head. Never heard him say a word about his own troubles. Only asks how everyone else is doing. Then Gordon's eyes hardened slightly. That's why it burns me up, seeing Riley and Tessa treat him like dirt. Keanu didn't respond, but a heaviness settled in his chest. Guilt. Yes. But something sharper, to anger. A protective anger that was beginning to rise. Gordon continued, lowering his voice even more. I've heard them. Those two cashiers, whispering about him, calling him slow, useless, dead weight. He shook his head in disgust. Dead weight. That man has more heart than the two of them combined. Keanu kept his expression neutral, but inside the words cut deep. They mess with him on purpose, Gordon said. Complain when he helps customers. Roll their eyes when he tries to fix problems. It's like they're trying to push him out. Keanu already knew that. He had seen it firsthand, but hearing it from a regular, from someone who wasn't looking for drama or trying to meddle, it confirmed that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a targeted cruelty. Gordon leaned back, studying Keanu's disguised face for a long moment. Diners changed lately. Used to be a place folks looked forward to. Now it feels tense, like everyone's just waiting for something to snap. Keanu swallowed. You think the owner knows? Gordon snorted. Owner doubt, he's been here in years. Diner still makes money, so he probably assumes everything's fine. Keanu stared down at his coffee. The truth in those words stung. He had trusted managers, trusted systems, trusted that everyone here would treat each other right. He had been wrong. Someone needs to step in, Gordon said. Someone who actually cares. Keanu lifted his gaze toward Frank again. The older man was rubbing his wrist, trying to hide a flash of pain. For a brief moment, Frank leaned against the counter, catching his breath before straightening his back and continuing on. Something inside Keanu hardened completely. Someone would step in. He would. Gordon eventually stood, stretching his arms, as Marina set down a plate of eggs he had ordered earlier. Frank deserves better, he said quietly. Most people don't notice folks like him until they're gone. He tapped the table twice, a gesture heavy with meaning. If the owner ever shows up, maybe he'll understand what this place really needs. With that, Gordon walked away, joining a group of fishermen near the window. Keanu remained still. The diner's hum returned around him, but his thoughts were sharp and unyielding. Every detail Gordon shared carved deeper into his conscience. He was the one who set this place in motion. He was the one who promised people fair treatment and stability. He was the one who told himself Harbor Light would always represent the best parts of a community. And yet, here sat Frank limping, working through pain, taking blame for theft he didn't commit, helping everyone but receiving nothing in return. Keanu watched Frank refill someone's coffee, offering a soft smile, even though exhaustion hung on his face like a shadow. The customer thanked him warmly, and Frank nodded with quiet gratitude before returning to his station. Across the diner, Riley scoffed at something on his phone. Tessa leaned on the counter, yawning dramatically, as though the job itself was beneath her. They didn't see the effort Frank put in. They didn't see the strain on Linda, who was drowning under responsibility without support. They didn't see Marina wiping tears behind the soda machine after being belittled. But Keanu did. He had seen enough to understand one painful truth. The diner wasn't failing because business was bad or customers stopped coming. It was failing because the wrong people held the front lines. The thought twisted inside him. He had been absent too long. Keanu folded his newspaper, slid it aside, and rested his hands on the counter. His disguise still hid him, but there was no disguising the resolve forming behind his eyes. He would not allow a good man like Frank to be destroyed by neglect or cruelty. Not here, not in a diner he built with hope and trust. The time for watching was over. Keanu Reeves, the owner no one saw coming, was preparing to take back his diner. The late afternoon crowd drifted in slowly, turning the diner into a patchwork of conversations and clinking silverware. Keanu remained at his booth, arms resting on the counter, pretending to skim the newspaper while keeping a careful eye on the register. The weight of everything he had learned pressed heavily on him, but he stayed still, waiting for the next crack in the facade. It came sooner than expected. The door chimed softly, and a teenage boy stepped inside. He looked about 16, skinny, shy, wearing a backpack faded from years of use. His sneakers were frayed around the edges, and his hands fidgeted nervously as he approached the counter. Marina greeted him with a warm smile, but he drifted past her toward Riley, clutching a few folded bills. Riley barely looked up. "Yeah, what do you want?" The boy swallowed hard. Just a grilled cheese and a small soda." "That's it?" Riley asked, his tone dripping with annoyance. "Yes, sir." Riley punched the order into the register and announced the total. The boy started counting out his money, his fingers trembling as he placed each bill on the counter. Keanu noticed the tension in his shoulders, the embarrassment creeping over him, the fear of coming up short. After a moment, the boy's face fell. He counted again, then again. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I thought I had enough. I'm $1 short." Riley didn't miss a beat. He leaned back dramatically, letting out a loud, mocking laugh that filled the diner. "You're kidding, right? You come here without enough money. What is this, your first time eating out?" The boy went red instantly. Marina stepped forward, about to say something, but Tessa beat her to it. "Call security," Tessa said with a smirk. "We can't have people loitering around here begging for food." "There is no security," Marina whispered, horrified. Riley waved her off. "Then maybe we should get some." The boy stepped back, clutching his backpack straps. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean I can just leave." His voice cracked with humiliation. Keanu felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. He pushed his newspaper aside, ready to intervene, but someone else reached the counter first. Frank. He moved slowly, but his presence brought a hush to the air around him. He stepped between Riley and the boy, his expression soft but firm, the kind of strength that didn't need volume. "It's all right," son, Frank said gently. "Food should never be a burden." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few worn bills. Money he desperately needed. Money he shouldn't have had to give away, but he handed it over without hesitation. Riley rolled his eyes. "Oh, great! Grandpa Hero saves the day again." Tessa snorted. "No wonder the drawer keeps coming up short." Frank froze. The words hit him harder than any accusation Linda had made earlier. His hand slowed as he placed the money on the counter. His shoulders tensed. For a moment, he simply stood there, swallowing the hurt that rose in his chest. The teenage boy looked between them, confused. "Thank you," he whispered. "Really, thank you." Frank nodded with a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not this time. Keanu felt something hot and sharp burn through him. A breaking point. Riley wasn't just cruel, he was destroying a good man from the inside out. Keanu knew with absolute certainty that tonight he would return not as a quiet customer, but with a plan that would change everything. The teenage boy carried his tray to a corner booth, still glancing back toward Frank with gratitude. He looked shaken, but relieved. Frank gave him a reassuring nod before turning away, though his steps were slower, heavier than before. The accusation lingered in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Riley leaned toward Tessa, not bothering to lower his voice. "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. He just hands out money like candy and then wonders why things don't add up." Tessa smirked. "Maybe he likes playing the hero, makes him feel important." "Important?" Riley scoffed. "He's a dishwasher." "That's it." Frank's back stiffened. His hand hovered over the counter for a moment, as though steadying himself. The insult slipped under his skin, sharp and cold. He didn't turn around, didn't defend himself. But Keanu could see the tremor in his shoulders. A man can endure hard labor, long nights, and decades of sacrifice, but humiliation cuts deeper than exhaustion. Keanu watched the scene unfold with a growing fire in his chest. Gordon's words echoed through his mind, how Frank helped strangers, how he saved a child's life, how he carried kindness like a responsibility carved into his bones. And now, here he was, being torn down by two people who couldn't see past their own bitterness. Linda stepped out of her office again, rubbing her temples. She looked exhausted, caught between suspicion and uncertainty. When her eyes landed on Frank, she hesitated. Riley noticed immediately. "You see that," Riley said loudly. "He's right there at the register again." Tessa nodded dramatically, always hovering. Frank finally spoke, his voice low. "I was only helping the boy." "Yeah," Riley snapped, "and the drawer keeps coming up short on your shift. Funny how that works." Frank placed a hand over his chest, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, as if the words had left a bruise beneath his ribs. He took a step back, avoiding everyone's gaze. Marina moved toward him with concern, but he gently shook his head, signaling her to keep working. He didn't want pity. He didn't want conflict. He wanted to keep doing his job quietly, decently, humbly. But Keanu couldn't stay quiet anymore, not after seeing a good man be broken, piece by piece. He knew now that this wasn't about simple mistakes or random shortages. Riley and Tessa were laying the groundwork to push Frank out completely, and tonight, when the diner closed, Keanu would return. He would come back ready, with a plan, with proof, with the truth, and no one in this diner would see it coming. The teenage boy sat quietly with his food still glancing back at Frank with wide, grateful eyes. For a moment, the diner softened, then Riley shattered it with a loud snort. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Grandpa just can't help himself." Tessa crossed her arms. "Yeah. And then they wonder why the drawer's short. Maybe someone should finally call it out." Frank paused mid-step. The words hit him squarely, sharper than any blow. His shoulders stiffened. He lowered his gaze, trying to hide the pain gathering behind his eyes. He had spent years giving pieces of himself to this diner, helping customers, comforting staff, picking up shifts no one wanted. Now his kindness was being twisted into something ugly. Keanu felt his pulse climb. He kept still, but the fire inside him rose like a tide, pulling its way to shore. Linda stepped out from the back, rubbing her forehead and scanning the front counter. She looked worn down, exhausted, from trying to manage a chaotic team. Her eyes drifted toward Frank just long enough for Riley to seize the moment. "You see him, right?" Riley said loudly. "Always hanging around the register, always touching things." Frank turned fully this time, his voice quiet but steady. "I was only helping the boy." Riley rolled his eyes. "Sure, helping. And somehow we lose money every time you're helping." Tessa added, "Maybe it's time someone connected the dots." The room fell silent for a moment. Even the teenage boy looked up stunned. Frank placed a hand gently on his chest, not dramatic, just wounded. A man trying to hold on to dignity while being cut open in front of strangers. Keanu stared at Riley and Tessa with a calm that was more dangerous than anger. This wasn't just disrespect now. This was cruelty with intent. And tonight, he would put an end to it. The diner finally began to slow as the sky faded into a muted orange. Customers drifted out with tired smiles, unaware of the silent war unfolding behind the counter. Riley and Tessa clocked out with smug expressions, never glancing in Frank's direction. Marina hurried through her closing tasks, trying to avoid further criticism. Linda retreated to her office to drown in paperwork she didn't deserve to face alone. Frank stayed behind, sweeping the last crumbs from beneath the booths, wiping down tables one final time, with gentle, deliberate movements. He didn't rush. He never did. Even after the long, grueling day, he worked with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through the last 9 years. Keanu waited in his booth until Frank finished the last of his chores. He kept his head down, pretending to examine his receipt while watching from the corner of his eye. The older man placed the broom in the back closet, took off his apron, folded it neatly, and slipped it onto a hook. His limp was more pronounced now, each step slow and careful. He rubbed his lower back once before forcing his posture straight again. Frank said goodnight to no one in particular and stepped out the side door. Keanu left a minute later, exiting through the front and heading toward his car. He parked farther back than usual, well into the shadows of a tall row of pine trees that bordered the lot. From there he could watch without being seen. Frank walked slowly across the gravel, the chilly night making his limp even stiffer. His breath fogged in the air as he wrapped his thin jacket tighter around himself. He didn't head toward the street. He didn't walk toward a bus stop. He didn't drive home. He turned behind the diner. Keanu followed on foot, keeping a careful distance. The back lot was dimly lit, the old lampposts flickering as if they too were worn down from years of service. Frank made his way toward a small cluster of aging structures, hidden behind a row of dumpsters and overgrown shrubs. There, barely visible in the half-light, stood a dilapidated building, more of a converted storage unit than a proper home. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. The siding was chipped and discolored. A single porch light hung above the door, its bulb burned out long ago. The small window beside it was taped at the corners, holding a cracked pane together. Frank climbed the 2 creaking steps and pushed the door open. It stuck for a moment before giving way. Keanu approached quietly, stopping just far enough to see through the thin curtain that covered the window. He felt a weight in his chest as the scene unfolded. Inside, Frank sat alone at a tiny wooden table no larger than a child's desk. A single lamp illuminated the room with a tired yellow glow. The walls were bare except for a faded photo of a young woman his daughter Keanu guessed. The entire space consisted of that table, a small sink, and a narrow bed that looked older than Frank himself. Frank removed a small envelope from his pocket and emptied its contents. A few wrinkled bills scattered across the table. He counted them slowly, stacking them into piles with aching hands. Then he separated a portion into a small, zippered pouch, labeled with a piece of torn masking tape. The words written on it made Keanu stop breathing. "Daughter's meds." Frank stared at the pouch for a long moment, rubbing his thumb along the taped label, as though trying to reassure himself he had enough. He didn't. Keanu could see the shortfall. Frank sighed quietly, folded the remaining bills barely enough for himself, and placed them carefully into an old coffee tin beneath the bed. He kept nothing for comfort, nothing for rest, nothing for joy, just survival. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He had seen poverty before, but seeing Frank's reality, the reality of a man who gave so much, felt like something breaking open inside him. He had failed this man without even knowing it. Tonight, that would end. Keanu stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall into place. The cold night air wrapped around him, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness settling inside his chest. He had expected hardship. He had expected loneliness. But he hadn't expected this, a man living on scraps, sacrificing himself piece by piece while being blamed for crimes he didn't commit. Frank's kindness wasn't a gesture. It was a lifestyle. A promise he carried alone. A promise no one had bothered to repay. Keanu walked slowly back toward his car, each step grounding his growing resolve. By the time he reached the driver's side door, the fogged windows reflected not the disguised customer he had pretended to be all day, but the owner who had let too much slip through his fingers. He unlocked his phone and dialed a familiar number. The call barely rang once before someone answered. Ruiz speaking. Keanu leaned against the car door. "It's me." Officer Ruiz's tone shifted immediately. "Everything all right?" "No," Keanu said quietly. "Something's off at Harbor Light. I need you to check the employee reports for the last few months. Complaints, cash discrepancies, register logs, anything that looks unusual." Ruiz didn't hesitate. "You think someone's stealing?" "I know someone is," Keanu replied. His voice remained steady, but the anger underneath it was unmistakable. "And I think they're framing Frank." Ruiz exhaled slowly. "The older gentleman. The dishwasher." "Yes. He's the one they're trying to push out." Ruiz's voice hardened. "I'll look into everything tonight. You'll have answers by morning." "Thank you," Keanu said. He ended the call and rested both hands on the roof of his car, staring down at the cracked gravel beneath his boots. The diner lights flickered behind him, glowing faintly against the darkness. This wasn't just about exposing two thieves anymore. It wasn't even about salvaging a business. This was about a man who had given everything he had, and then a bit more, while the world ignored his breaking body and breaking heart. Keanu lifted his head breath, steadying. He would not let Frank drown alone. Tomorrow, everything would change. Keanu arrived at Harbor Light Diner just after sunrise. The coastal air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of salt and wet pavement. He wore the same disguise as before, faded cap worn, flannel stubble he hadn't bothered to trim. But the man beneath the disguise was different. Last night had stripped away any remaining doubt. Today, he wasn't here to observe. He was here to act. The diner lights flickered on as the staff prepared for the morning rush. Frank had already arrived, moving slowly as he wiped down the counters with small, careful motions. Every bend of his back seemed to cost him something. Yet he greeted each employee with a soft hello, even those who barely acknowledged him. Keanu chose a booth near the counter close enough to the register to monitor everything without raising suspicion. He placed a newspaper in front of him, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning every movement from behind the printed pages. Minutes later, his phone buzzed once, a prearranged signal. He stood casually and stepped outside through the side door, finding Officer Ruiz waiting near the delivery entrance. Ruiz wore plain clothes and carried a small folder tucked beneath his arm. His expression was serious. "You were right," Ruiz said quietly. "There's a pattern." Keanu nodded. "Show me." Ruiz opened the folder and revealed a series of printed spreadsheets, handwritten notes, and copies of internal reports. He began summarizing in a low voice. Every shortage in the past 4 months happened on shifts where either Riley or Tessa were working. Not one on shifts covered by Frank. Not one. Keanu closed his eyes briefly. Hearing it confirmed what he already knew. Ruiz continued tapping one page with his finger. Frank's record is spotless. No write-ups, no customer complaints, 10 commendations from regulars, even a thank you letter from that fisherman's daughter. Another page revealed something else. Marina filed a complaint about missing tip money last month, Ruiz said. Claimed she saw Riley adjusting the jar when no one was around. The report never got processed. Keanu frowned. Why manager was overwhelmed. Paperwork backlog. She probably set it aside and never returned to it. Another sheet listed several customer notes. 2 different guests reported incorrect change, Ruiz added. Thought they were overcharged. They mentioned it on feedback cards, but didn't return to dispute it. Keanu flipped through the documents. Every line added weight to the truth he carried. This is enough to act legally, Ruiz said, but if you want to confront them publicly, you'll need something visual. Something undeniable. Keanu closed the folder slowly. I know. Ruiz handed it to him. Be careful. They're sloppy, but not stupid. Keanu nodded. Thank you. I'll take it from here. Ruiz stepped back and disappeared around the corner. Keanu remained outside for a moment, staring at the folder, feeling the anger knot tighter in his stomach. It wasn't just about theft now. It was about the way they had pushed blame onto Frank, a man who could barely afford to survive, let alone defend himself. He slipped the folder inside his jacket and walked back into the diner. Inside, the morning rush was beginning. Riley stood at the register, flipping through receipts with an annoyed look, while Tessa leaned on the counter, yawning dramatically. Frank cleaned the coffee machine, unaware that the truth was finally gathering around him like a shield. Keanu sat down again, pulling the napkin dispenser closer. His fingers brushed along the underside, finding the small latch he had installed years ago. Today, he would use it. The investigation was beginning in full. Keanu waited until Riley turned his back before leaning forward, slightly examining the napkin dispenser. The stainless steel surface reflected the glow of the overhead lights, hiding the tiny camera he had tucked inside its hollow base. It was angled perfectly toward the register. Anyone watching closely would see nothing unusual. It looked like any other piece of diner equipment, but today, it would become the most important object in the room. He timed his movements carefully. Each time Frank passed by, Keanu pretended to adjust the dispenser or pull napkins, positioning the camera just right. Frank paid no attention. Riley and Tessa were too focused on themselves to notice anything. The perfect opening. But Keanu needed a second angle. One camera alone wouldn't be enough if Riley and Tessa tried to twist the story later. He slowly reached over to the vent beside the counter, unscrewing the cover just enough to slide a small device inside. He kept his movements lazy, casual, like someone bored and restless. He had almost finished when he heard footsteps behind him. "Sir, can I help you with something?" Riley's voice. Close. Suspicious. Keanu froze for half a second. Then he let a handful of coins slip from his hand and scatter loudly across the floor. "Oh man, sorry," Keanu muttered, crouching down clumsily. "Guess my fingers ain't what they used to be." Riley sighed with irritation and stepped back to avoid the coins. "Whatever, just don't block the register." As Riley turned away, Keanu carefully pushed the vent cover back into place. His heartbeat slowed. He had come within inches of being caught before the cameras were even active. But now everything was set. Frank walked by on his way to the sink, limping slightly as he carried a stack of dishes. Keanu watched him struggle to straighten his back. To anyone else, it might have looked like a simple moment in a hectic morning. To Keanu, it was the final reminder of why he was here. He tapped lightly on his phone, activating the live feed. Both cameras came online, blinking silently from their hiding places. The screen showed a clear view of the register, the tip jar, the counter, and both cashiers. Everything that happened next would be recorded. Riley walked back toward the register, muttering under his breath about customers. Tessa scrolled on her phone, not even pretending to work. Neither of them had any idea their every move was now being documented. Keanu leaned back in his booth, his expression calm. For the first time since arriving, he felt the scales begin to shift. Justice had just entered the diner. The lunch rush hit Harbor Light Diner like a sudden storm. The door swung open again and again as customers poured in, construction workers still in dusty boots, office employees on their break, families trying to squeeze in a quick meal before the day swept them away again. The room filled with chatter and clattering plates, the scent of grilled onions mixing with fresh coffee. On the surface, it looked like a thriving midday crowd. Underneath, something far more strained pulsed through the diner like an invisible current. Marina moved from table to table with a visible tremor in her hands. Her anxiety had been rising for days, and now she looked like she was surviving minute by minute. When a customer waved her over asking for extra dressing, she nodded quickly and hurried to the kitchen window. But in her rush, she mixed up 2 orders, placing the wrong plates on the wrong table. The mistake wasn't unusual. Mistakes happened in every diner during the rush, but today it became a spectacle. Riley spotted it from behind the register. He slammed a stack of receipts on the counter and shouted across the room, "Seriously, Marina." Again. "Can you do anything right today?" His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. Marina froze her face, crumpling for a split second before she forced it still again. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. I'm sorry," she finally whispered. Riley rolled his eyes dramatically. "Yeah, that helps. Maybe stop messing up orders every 10 minutes. Tessa laughed from behind him. Pretty sure that's her superpower. A few customers exchanged uncomfortable looks, but no one spoke up. Marina stood there trembling until Frank appeared beside her, stepping between her and the stairs of the room. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'll fix the orders. You take a breath." Marina nodded quickly and hurried away, wiping her eyes. But Riley wasn't done. "Hey, while you're playing hero," he said loudly, the register's 10 short again, "we gonna pretend you didn't pass by here a few times today?" Frank blinked, confused. I haven't touched the register." Tessa crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Sure you haven't. It's always you on the floor when this happens." Frank's shoulders slumped. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply lowered his head and whispered, "If I caused confusion, I apologize." Keanu watched the entire thing with his jaw tightening. He saw the moment Frank's eyes glistened with the threat of tears. The way he blinked them away before anyone noticed. The way his hands shook as he carried the plates back to the kitchen. Every gesture cut deeper than the last. Keanu's fingers curled around the edge of his table. He forced himself to stay seated. He needed Riley and Tessa to fully expose themselves. If he intervened now, they could spin another story, claim he misunderstood or misheard. The cameras were rolling. He needed undeniable evidence. He needed them to dig their own hole until no excuse could pull them out. Then the next moment arrived another blow to Frank's already battered spirit. A single father approached the register with two small kids tugging at his sleeves. He placed his tray down and handed Riley his card. The machine beeped once, then again, then flashed red. "Sorry," Riley said loudly, "your card's declining." The father checked his wallet with shaking hands. I don't understand. I thought there should be enough." Tessa snorted. "If you knew your balance, this wouldn't happen." The father looked around, mortified. His youngest child hugged his leg, confused about why people were staring. "I have cash," he said, fumbling. "Just let me see." He counted what he had. He was exactly $1 short. Riley smirked. "Well, that's not enough for the meal, is it?" Keanu felt the shift before it happened. Frank emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He had heard the commotion. He stepped forward, voice steady and warm. Frank stood beside the father, placing one gentle hand on the man's shoulder. His posture was small, almost apologetic, yet his voice carried the warm firmness of someone who understood hardship far too well. "It's all right," Frank said quietly. "Let the kids eat. I'll take care of it." The father shook his head. "No, I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not?" Frank assured him. "Food should never be a burden." He took out his thin wallet, the same worn one Keanu had seen the night before in Frank's tiny room. Inside, folded with careful precision, were only a few bills. Frank hesitated for half a second, as if calculating what else he would need to give up to cover this meal. Then he handed the cash to Riley. Riley took it with a dramatic sigh. "Here we go again. Grandpa Charity strikes again. No wonder the drawer keeps coming up short." Tessa added, "He probably hands out free meals all day and expects us to clean up the mess." Several customers looked over now, hearing the cruelty in their voices. But the father was too focused on thanking Frank, tears forming in his eyes as he hugged his youngest child. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know what that means." Frank smiled faintly. "Just pay it forward when you can." But when he turned away, Keanu saw it. The crack in his composure, the hint of heartbreak, the sting of being ridiculed for something so pure. The humiliation from Riley and Tessa didn't just irritate him, it cut deep into the dignity he tried so hard to hold on to every day. Keanu's jaw tightened until he felt the strain in his teeth. His hands curled around the edge of the table, gripping so hard his knuckles turned white beneath the strain. He wanted to rise. He wanted to confront them. He wanted to tear down every cruel word they had ever thrown at Frank. But the cameras were recording. He needed the full truth, documented every lie, every theft, every unkindness. So he remained seated. The lunch crowd continued buzzing around him, unaware that the storm gathering in Keanu's chest was reaching its breaking point. Tomorrow, justice would not simply enter the diner. Tomorrow, it would take the floor. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Harbor Light Diner, painting the windows in a warm amber glow that did nothing to soften the rising tension inside. The lunch rush had passed, but the atmosphere hadn't calmed. If anything, it felt heavier. Customers sensed something wasn't right, though they couldn't name it. Staff moved with stiff, uneasy steps. Even the air seemed to carry a quiet warning. Then Linda emerged from the back office. Her expression alone changed everything. Her hair, usually tied neatly, had come loose around her face. Papers were clutched tightly between her fingers, and her headset beeped with unattended messages. When she stepped toward the register, her voice trembled with frustration and exhaustion. "We're auditing the drawer tonight," she announced loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear. "If it's short again, someone's losing their job." Riley straightened immediately. Tessa stopped scrolling through her phone. They didn't look afraid. They didn't look confused. They exchanged a knowing look, a look filled with calculation, a look that made Keanu's stomach twist. He recognized it instantly. He had seen it before in people who thrived on manipulation. They weren't intimidated by Linda's warning, they were preparing to use it, preparing to twist it, preparing to push the blame directly onto the person who would never fight back. Frank. Keanu watched Riley glance toward the old dishwasher, and Tessa do the same, each wearing a thin, deceitful smirk. It wasn't hard to read their thoughts. To them, tonight was an opportunity. One final push. One last act to remove the man they'd been targeting for months. Keanu felt the air tighten in his lungs. He needed to prepare before they acted. That afternoon, when the crowd thinned and the staff settled into a lull, Keanu stepped outside for a moment and dialed a number he knew by heart. The phone rang once before a familiar voice answered. "Hello, Sophia, it's me," he said. She hesitated. "Is everything all right? I need your help," Keanu said softly. "It's about someone who's being framed, someone who doesn't deserve what's happening to him." Sophia was a single mother he met through a charity event in town. She worked 2 jobs, balancing life between her daughter Lily and endless responsibilities. She was kind, honest, and the last person who would want to embarrass someone else. That was why Keanu trusted her. He explained everything: Frank's situation, the pattern of bullying, the likely plan Riley and Tessa were forming. Sophia listened without interrupting. Finally, she spoke. "Keanu, what do you need me to do?" He exhaled slowly. "I need you to come into the diner today, order a meal, and when you get to the register, I need you to pretend you can't pay." Sophia fell silent. Keanu could almost feel the weight of her hesitation. "I know it puts you in a tough position," he whispered, "but it's the only way to protect an innocent man. I can promise you this, it won't harm you or your daughter. I'll be right there the entire time." Sophia sighed gently. "If it will help him, I'll do it." "Thank you," Keanu murmured. "I won't forget it." An hour later she arrived. Sophia entered the diner quietly, holding the hand of her little girl, Lily. She looked the part, perfectly nervous, uncertain, scanning the room as if worried she didn't belong. The late afternoon light cast a soft glow through the windows, illuminating the tension that had already settled like dust over everything. People glanced up at her, then looked away. She walked slowly toward an empty booth, helping Lily climb into her seat. Keanu watched from across the diner, heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. He hated dragging Sophia into this. He hated involving a child. But desperate situations required difficult moves, and Frank's life was being squeezed tighter by the hour. Sophia ordered a small meal grilled cheese for Lily soup for herself. She ate slowly, forcing her hands to tremble just enough for the emotion to appear real. Lily, unaware of the plan, swung her legs and hummed softly to herself. When they finished, Sophia approached the register. Tessa looked up instantly, sensing vulnerability. She straightened, ready to pounce. "You paying cash or card?" she asked, voice sharp. Sophia fumbled with her purse. I thought my card would go through, but..." She pulled it out, hesitating. "I can try." Tessa snatched the card and swiped it. The machine beeped once, then again, then flashed the red decline message. Tessa leaned back with an exaggerated sigh. "Ma'am, if you don't have money, maybe don't order things you can't afford." A few customers turned to look. Sophia flushed, her eyes dropping to the floor. Lily clung to her leg. "I'm so sorry," Sophia whispered. "I thought maybe I miscalculated. I didn't mean to. Do you have anything?" Tessa demanded. "Because someone has to pay for this." Sophia shook her head, and Lily's eyes began to water. That was the moment Frank appeared. He stepped out from behind the counter with slow, painful steps, wiping his hands on a damp towel. His gaze softened immediately when he saw the frightened child and the trembling mother. "It's all right," Frank said gently. Let me help." Sophia shook her head. "I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not," he said. "You deserve kindness as much as anyone." He took out his wallet, the same thin wallet Keanu had seen him count bills from in that dim, lonely room behind the diner. He removed a few carefully folded notes, far more than he should have had to give, and handed them to Tessa. Riley, who had been watching from the side, seized the moment. He marched to the register, slapped the drawer closed, and shouted loudly enough for the entire diner to hear. The drawer's short. again. And look who's standing right here, every single time. The room fell silent. Customers stopped eating. Forks hovered midair. Marina's hand flew to her mouth. Even Linda froze at the entrance of the hallway. Frank's eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. His face drained of color. He looked down at the floor as if searching for a way to disappear. Keanu felt the stab of humiliation hit him almost as hard as it hit Frank. His fists tightened in his lap. Every muscle in his body tensed, but he stayed silent because the cameras had caught it all. And the truth was now undeniable. The diner felt colder than it had moments ago. Even with the ovens humming in the kitchen and sunlight stretching across the counter, a chill settled over the room, as if the walls themselves understood what was about to happen. The customers sensed it too. Conversations quieted. Chairs stopped scraping. Even the clatter of plates from the kitchen faded. Linda stepped forward. Her tired footsteps echoed across the tile floor. She carried a clipboard tucked beneath one arm, but it was her expression that spoke louder than anything she might have said. Stress had carved deep lines into her face. She looked like a woman trying to hold an entire world together with fraying thread. "Frank," she said, her voice sharp, tight, and trembling with exhaustion. "Can you come up here for a moment?" Frank looked up from where he stood near the busing station. His hands froze mid-motion, still wrapped around a stack of dishes. The room watched as he placed them down gently and wiped his palms on his apron. His steps were slow, uneven, carrying the weight of someone who had endured too many blows already. He reached the front counter and stood before Linda. His posture was small shoulders bent, eyes lowered. A man bracing for yet another storm. Before Linda could speak, Riley stepped forward with a theatrical sigh. "Just get it over with already," Riley said loudly. "He's been hanging around the register all day, and every time he does the drawer ends up short." Gasps rippled across the room. A couple sitting near the window exchanged worried glances. A teenager in a hoodie leaned forward, sensing drama. Marina, standing behind the counter, pressed a hand to her mouth. Frank's eyes widened. "I haven't touched the register," he said softly. "I was only helping people?" Riley smirked and shook his head. "Yeah, convenient excuse." Tessa crossed her arms and stepped beside him, matching his smirk with one of her own. "I swear I saw him take money," she said loudly. "Right there." She pointed to the very spot Frank had been standing earlier, helping Sophia and Lily. Another gasp spread through the diner. Murmurs rose like a tide. "You saw him? Is he really stealing? I thought he was so kind." Frank's lips parted, but no sound came out. His face drained of color. His hands shook as he clasped them together in front of him, trying to steady himself. "I didn't take anything," he managed to whisper. "I was only helping, like I always do," Riley scoffed. "Sure you were." Tessa nodded. "He's been doing it for months. We just didn't want to assume the worst, but the evidence keeps pointing to him." Evidence. A word they wielded like a blade. Frank shrank further under the weight of it. His eyes shimmered, but he blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall in front of the customers. All his years of hard work, loyalty, generosity, reduced to suspicion in seconds. Linda looked torn apart, torn between two realities, torn between the man who had never failed her and the mounting shortages she didn't understand. "Frank," she said quietly, "I don't know what's happening anymore, but the money is missing. Again." Marina burst forward, her voice shaking. "He didn't do anything. He never stole from anyone. He helps people every single day. Stay out of it," Riley snapped. "You just feel guilty because your mistakes get covered by him too." Marina opened her mouth to respond, but her words drowned beneath the rising accusations, the whispering customers, the tense silence from Linda. Keanu sat in his booth, muscles tightening. This had gone far enough. He knew he couldn't wait another second. He stood. Keanu rose slowly from his booth, his chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound was quiet, but in the tense stillness, it cut through the room like a warning. Several customers turned toward him. Others followed their eyes, drawn to the lone man standing at the edge of the unfolding storm. He didn't look dramatic. He didn't posture. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood with a calm, steady presence that demanded attention. Linda glanced his way, startled. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, trying to maintain order, though her voice trembled. Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Frank, really looked at him. The older man stood with his head bowed, shoulders slumped, as if he believed he deserved every accusation being thrown at him. His hands twisted in front of him, searching for something to hold on to. Frank had spent years serving others, years helping customers, years cleaning up messes that weren't his. And now, those same years were being used against him by people who had never once lifted him up. Keanu felt a heaviness settle in his chest. This was more than injustice. This was cruelty wrapped in confidence. He shifted his gaze to Riley and Tessa. Their expressions told him everything, smirking triumph, false righteousness, excitement at finally cornering their target. They believed the room belonged to them. They believed Linda had no choice but to fire Frank. They believed Frank was defenseless. They believed no one would stand up for him. Keanu took a slow breath, grounding himself, making sure his voice would come out controlled. "I think," he said at last, "that before you make any decisions, you should hear the truth." The room stilled. Riley frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Keanu stepped forward. One calm stride, then another. "It means the man you're accusing has done nothing wrong." Tessa scoffed. "And how would you know?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Because I've been here, all day, watching." Riley opened his mouth, ready to argue, but Keanu kept going. "And because I saw what really happened at that register." A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. People leaned forward in their seats. Linda's eyes widened. "You saw something?" Keanu nodded. Frank looked up, startled, hope flickering faintly through the tears he had tried so hard to hide. Keanu met his eyes for a brief, quiet moment. "You're not alone," he said softly. And the room, once filled with doubt, shifted around them. The diner held its breath. Every eye in the room followed Keanu as he stepped forward, his calm presence slicing through the tension like a quiet blade. Frank stared at him with a trembling uncertainty, unsure whether to hope or brace for another blow. Riley and Tessa stood stiffly behind the counter, exchanging confused glances, their earlier confidence wavering. Then Keanu reached up. His fingers gripped the brim of his old faded baseball cap, and he removed it. Gasps erupted instantly, rippling across the diner like a wave hitting shore. Whispers arose from every corner of the room. "That's no way. Is that really?" Keanu Reeves stood there in the open, no longer disguised, no longer blending into the background. The humble flannel shirt and worn boots were still on him, but now the truth illuminated everything. The customers who had only glimpsed him casually earlier now stared with full recognition. Marina's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Linda stumbled back a step, clipboard dropping from her fingers and landing with a soft thud on the floor. Riley's complexion turned chalk white. Tessa nearly dropped the register drawer she had been gripping. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded stillness. "I've been here for 3 days," he said, speaking calmly but with a sharp, controlled authority that could be felt all the way to the back tables. "Watching. Listening." The diner fell so silent that even the hum of the refrigerator sounded loud. "I've watched customers treated unfairly," Keanu continued. "I've watched kindness mocked. I've watched lies spread about a man who has done nothing but serve every person who walks through these doors with dignity." Frank squeezed his trembling hands together, blinking rapidly, trying to process the moment. It felt unreal. He had spent his life being invisible, overlooked, underestimated. And now the most recognizable person in the room stood defending him. Keanu reached into his pocket and took out his phone. "Some of you don't know this diner has a new owner," he said. "I am that owner. And before making any decisions, I wanted to see the truth for myself." Riley swallowed hard. You set us up." Keanu looked at him with unwavering steadiness. "No, you set yourselves up. I simply watched." He plugged his phone into the HDMI cable, hanging beneath the diner's old television, the one mounted above the counter for customers to watch sports games. The screen blinked to life. At first, it showed only the camera app interface. Then Keanu tapped a folder, and the footage began to play. The first clip showed Riley sliding a $10 bill into his pocket when he thought no one was looking. A collective gasp moved through the room. The next clip displayed Tessa handing the wrong change to a distracted father, then pocketing the difference behind her back. More clips lined up, each worse than the one before, Riley rolling his eyes and mocking Marina as she cried. Tessa calling Frank Grandpa Charity, laughing behind his back. Both of them whispering sharply, plotting ways to blame register shortages on Frank. And then the final set of clips, Frank quietly helping customer after customer, lifting heavy trays despite the pain, paying for meals with his own dwindling money. Comforting children, encouraging Marina, never once asking for anything in return. The entire diner shook with outrage. Voices rose instantly as the truth filled the screen. Customers who had stayed silent before now found their anger rising to the surface. People shook their heads, muttered curses under their breath, pointed at the footage as if the images themselves demanded justice. A mother at a nearby booth pushed her chair back. I knew something was wrong when she shorted my change last week. An older trucker slapped his palm on the table. That man, he pointed at Frank, has waited on me for years. Never once seen him do wrong. Marina hugged herself, trembling with both relief and heartbreak. I told you, she whispered to Linda. I told you Frank would never steal. Linda pressed a hand to her forehead, her expression filled with disbelief and shame. She had been drowning under long shifts and missing money drawn into a narrative built on manipulation. Now she saw the truth as clearly as everyone else. But no one reacted more violently than Riley and Tessa. Riley stepped back as if the screen itself had pushed him. This isn't real. You edited that. Keanu didn't flinch. It came straight from the diner. Time-stamped, recorded today. Tessa's voice cracked. You can't prove anything. Cameras aren't legal without permission. Keanu held her gaze. They're allowed when installed by the owner. And I own this diner. Every inch of it. Riley's mouth fell open. Tessa staggered a step, tears of fear beginning to form. Frank stood frozen near the counter, hands trembling at his sides, watching himself on the screen, watching the kindness he gave so freely it overwhelmed him. For a moment, he didn't know where to look. He had lived so long in the shadows that stepping into the truth felt like stepping into a spotlight he wasn't prepared for. As the tension reached its peak, the entrance door opened. 2 police officers stepped inside. Officer Ruiz led the way, his expression firm and unyielding. His partner followed close behind. Riley backed into the wall. No. This is a misunderstanding. It's not, Ruiz replied. We've reviewed the evidence. Both of you are being taken into custody for theft, misconduct, and attempted fraud. Tessa shook her head, hands trembling wildly. You can't do this. Ruiz motioned to his partner, who calmly stepped forward. Turn around. The officer secured Tessa's wrists. Ruiz did the same to Riley. The moment the handcuffs clicked, the diner erupted in applause. Some people stood, others clapped from their seats. Marina sobbed openly. Linda covered her mouth with both hands, tears running down her cheeks, overwhelmed by relief and guilt. Frank remained still, too stunned to move or react. The officers led Riley and Tessa out of the diner, pushing open the glass door as a wave of cheers followed them onto the sidewalk. Inside, the room shifted. The tension dissipated like smoke. Keanu turned back toward Frank. The entire diner, unified in outrage, moments earlier, now waited in complete silence for what he would say next. The diner slowly settled after the storm of emotions, but the air still felt charged with something raw and powerful. Frank stood near the counter, shoulders slumped, hands trembling slightly at his sides. His face was pale with exhaustion, shock, and the weight of humiliation he'd carried for far too long. Customers hovered nearby, whispering words of support, but Frank looked almost afraid to meet their eyes. Keanu stepped toward him with steady, deliberate steps. There was no authority in his posture now, no dramatic presence, just quiet compassion. When he finally reached Frank, he lowered his voice. "Frank," he said softly, "I am so sorry. I should have seen this sooner." Frank swallowed hard. His lips parted as if to speak, but the words refused to come. He shook his head instead, a gesture thick with disbelief, hurt, and confusion. I didn't want any trouble," he whispered. "I just wanted to work. That's all." Keanu's chest tightened. "You shouldn't have had to survive this alone." Before Frank could respond, customers began to gather around him. The trucker from earlier approached first, clearing his throat awkwardly. "You've carried this place on your back," he said. "Didn't realize how much until now." "Thank you, Frank." A mother with 2 young kids stepped forward. "You always remembered my daughter's allergies. Nobody else did." "Thank you." A fisherman nodded. "Best dishwasher on the coast, and the best man, too." Marina moved through the crowd, wiping tears from her cheeks. When she reached Frank, she wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. "You saved me more times than I can count," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Frank stood completely still, overwhelmed, his eyes brimming. He looked around at the faces he had served for 9 years. People he had helped protected, comforted. People who were only now realizing how much he mattered. His breath shook as he exhaled. "I didn't think anyone noticed," he said softly. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. They noticed. They just didn't say it enough. He guided Frank gently toward the back hallway, away from the noise and the crowd. Frank walked hesitantly, as if unsure he deserved the attention or the kindness. Keanu pushed open the office door, letting the quiet envelop them. On Linda's desk sat a single folder. Frank stared at it, confused. "What's this?" Keanu walked around the desk and nodded toward the chair. "Sit," he said gently. "You've done enough standing for today." Frank obeyed, lowering himself slowly. His hands were still trembling when Keanu pushed the folder toward him. "You're not a dishwasher anymore," Keanu said. Frank stared at him, stunned. I don't understand. Open it." Frank's fingers fumbled with the flap. When he finally pulled out the papers inside, his eyes widened, his breath caught. Everything blurred for a moment as he blinked rapidly. Promotion operations, supervisor. Full benefits, higher pay, flexible hours, paid time off, medical coverage. He stared at the page as if it couldn't be real. A tear slipped down his cheek. Then another. "But I don't deserve this," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm just me." Keanu kneeled beside him so they were eye level. "Frank," he said in a steady, heartfelt tone, "you deserve more than this." Frank held the papers as if they were something fragile, something that might crumble if he breathed too hard. His eyes scanned the words again and again, each line hitting him with a force he was clearly struggling to absorb. His lips trembled. His hands shook. For a moment, it looked like he might fold the papers and hand them back out of sheer disbelief. "Keanu," he whispered, "I've spent my whole life scrubbing plates, mopping floors. I don't know anything about supervising." Keanu rested a hand gently on his shoulder. "You know everything about people. You know everything about hard work. You know everything about heart. That's what this place has been missing." Frank shook his head, still overwhelmed. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Keanu replied, his voice steady and warm. "You've been the backbone of this diner for 9 years. It's time the job title reflected that." Frank pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to steady his breathing. "Why me?" he murmured. "Why not someone younger? Someone stronger?" Keanu looked him directly in the eyes. "Because strength isn't measured in age or muscle. It's measured in character. And, Frank, you've shown more character in one shift than some people show in a lifetime." Frank's throat tightened. He covered his mouth with one hand, trying to keep the emotion from spilling out, but tears streamed down anyway. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a doorway to a life he never thought he'd reach. A chance to stand tall instead of shrinking into the background. A chance not to struggle alone. Keanu continued in a calm, firm tone. "You'll have full training. Support from me. Support from Linda. You'll be able to reduce your hours if you need to. Take breaks when your hands hurt. take days off without losing pay, and you'll finally have the medical coverage your body has needed for years." Frank closed his eyes, absorbing every word. The weight of years of hardship pressed through his chest, loosening slowly, like knots untying one by one. "I don't know what to say," Frank murmured. "Say yes," Keanu replied softly. "Say yes to a life where you don't have to break yourself to survive." A shaky laugh escaped Frank, mixed with a sob. He looked down at the papers again, then back at Keanu. "If you really believe I can do this, then I'll try." Keanu smiled, warm and proud. "That's all I ask." Frank nodded, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this, for seeing me." Keanu placed a hand over his shoulder once more. "I should have seen sooner, but I'm here now, and we're moving forward." Frank was still staring at the promotion papers when Keanu reached into his jacket pocket once more. His expression softened, becoming even more gentle, almost hesitant, as if what he was about to do required a different kind of courage. He held a second envelope thicker than the first, sealed with a simple white tab. He placed it on the desk in front of Frank. "There's one more thing," Keanu said quietly. Frank blinked, confused. He looked from the envelope to Keanu, then back again. I don't understand. You've already given me more than I deserve." "You deserve stability," Keanu replied. "You deserve dignity, and you deserve a life that isn't defined by fear of the next bill or whether you can keep a roof over your head." Frank hesitated, hands hovering over the envelope as though afraid it might burn him. Keanu nodded gently, giving him permission. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Frank lifted the flap and pulled out the papers inside. His breath caught instantly. He stared at the first page. Then he stared harder. His eyes widened, darting from line to line. His lips parted, but no sound came out. A deed. A real deed. To a modest but beautiful single-story home 5 blocks from the diner. A garden. A porch. 2 bedrooms. Enough space for more than just survival. Frank's mouth trembled. This can't be right," he whispered. This is a house." "It's your house," Keanu said softly. "Paid in full. No rent, no mortgage, no landlord raising prices on you again." Frank pressed the papers to his chest as though afraid they would vanish. Tears rushed to his eyes so fast he couldn't even wipe them away. His breathing grew uneven, his shoulders shaking. "My daughter," he whispered. She can live with me in a real home." Keanu nodded, his own eyes glistening. "She already knows. I called her this morning." Frank froze. Then the dam inside him broke completely. A raw, heavy sob escaped his chest. He reached forward before he could stop himself collapsing into Keanu's arms. Keanu held him firmly, supporting the weight of 9 years of pain, fear, loneliness, and exhaustion pouring out all at once. "You're safe now," Keanu murmured. "You're safe. And you don't have to do any of this alone." Frank cried harder, gripping the papers as if they were the most precious thing he'd ever owned. The sound of his emotion was overwhelming, thick with years of silent suffering he'd never allowed anyone to see. When Frankie finally pulled back, wiping at his cheeks, the noise outside the office began to grow. Staff members had gathered near the door, drawn by the sound of his sobs. Marina stepped forward, first eyes already red. "Is he okay?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded and stepped aside just enough for them to see the deed in Frank's hands. Marina's hand flew to her mouth. Linda gasped. A few customers leaned closer. And then one by one, people began cheering. The cheers grew louder, filling the hallway like a wave of warmth that wrapped itself around Frank. He looked up through blurry eyes as Marina rushed forward and hugged him tightly. Her voice trembled against his shoulder. "You deserve this so much," she whispered. "I'm so happy for you." Frank could barely speak. I never thought something like this would happen to me," he said, voice cracking. "Not in my lifetime." Linda stepped forward next. Her usually firm expression softened into one of regret and humility. She held her hands together almost nervously. "Frank, I need to say something. I'm sorry. I should have protected you better. I should have listened. I let things slide that I shouldn't have, and you paid the price for my mistakes." Frank shook his head gently. "Linda, you've always tried your best. I know that, but Linda's guilt was real and everyone saw it." Marina placed a hand on her arm, offering silent support. Linda exhaled slowly, then turned to Keanu. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing what we should have seen sooner." Keanu nodded without judgment. We moved forward from here, all of us. The customers inside the diner, who had been craning their necks to witness the moment, now began stepping closer. One by one, they approached Frank with kind words, pats on the shoulder, and smiles that carried real appreciation. A teenaged boy offered him a folded 20. A mother placed a little note in his hand that said, "Thank you for being kind." An elderly couple hugged him, calling him the heart of Harbor Light. Then someone placed a mason jar on the counter. A trucker grabbed a marker and scribbled on the glass, "Frank's Family Fund." Without hesitation, people began slipping bills inside. Some were small, some were generous. Every single one came from gratitude. Frank stared at the jar, overwhelmed all over again. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "I've never had people rooting for me." Keanu rested a calming hand on his back. "You gave kindness for years. This is just kindness coming home." The room quieted when Keanu stepped forward. His voice carried calm authority, but it also held empathy and conviction. "I want everyone here to know that today is not just about clearing Frank's name. It's about changing this diner for good. What happened here should never happen to anyone, not on my watch." Everyone listened closely. "So here's what's going to change." Keanu continued. "First, living wage increases for every employee. No more scraping by. No more panic at the end of the month." Marina gasped softly. Linda covered her mouth again. "Second tip." "Transparency," Keanu said. "No more missing jars. No more confusion. Everything will be logged, protected, and fairly divided." A few cooks peered out from the kitchen, eyes wide. "Third, an emergency employee fund. Anyone facing hard times, medical issues, rent trouble, family emergencies can get immediate help with no shame attached." Frank looked at Keanu with awe, still clutching the deed. Fourth, anonymous reporting, Keanu continued. "If someone mistreats a coworker or a customer, we'll know about it, and we'll act." Linda nodded firmly, already committed. And finally, Keanu added a community support program. "This diner will not just serve food, it will serve people. Free meals for anyone in crisis, volunteer days, local outreach." The diner erupted in applause louder than before, applause filled with hope. Frank wiped his face again, though his smile was growing stronger, steadier, brighter. For the first time in years, there was no fear in it, only gratitude. The weeks that followed transformed the Harbor Light Diner into something almost unrecognizable. The walls were the same, the booths the same, the sound of the grill still humming behind the counter, but the atmosphere carried a new kind of warmth, a deeper kind, a kind built from gratitude instead of exhaustion, and respect instead of fear. People felt it the moment they stepped through the door. Frank felt it most of all. Every morning he arrived a little earlier than necessary, standing taller than he had in years. There was no limp of embarrassment in his steps anymore, only the natural stiffness from old injuries that he managed with quiet dignity. His new supervisor badge rested proudly on his chest, polished so carefully that it caught the morning light whenever he turned. He greeted everyone by name now, not because he was obligated to, but because people finally greeted him back. Regulars waved at him from booths. Kids rushed up to show him drawings they made for him. Teenagers who used to ignore the staff now went out of their way to say hello. Even the tourists sensed there was something special about the man with the soft voice and kind eyes. Frank had become the heart everyone could finally see. He checked inventory lists with Linda each morning. He trained new hires, teaching them not just procedures, but kindness, reminding them gently that the diner's strength wasn't in the food, but in how people were treated. He handled complaints with calm steadiness, the same patience he had always shown at the sink. The only difference now was that people respected him for it. And every few days, the diner's door swung open and Frank's daughter stepped inside. She moved slowly at first, still adjusting to her father's new world. But her face brightened whenever she saw him, and she always called out Dad loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Frank never tried to hide the tears that filled his eyes each time. He hugged her tightly, a man who had waited too long for moments like these. With her health improving and her hope renewed, she started helping part-time at the counter, greeting customers with the same gentle warmth her father carried. The sight of the two of them together became a symbol of the diner's rebirth. A father and daughter rebuilding a life not through charity, but through dignity and recognition finally given. And Keanu saw it all. Some days he entered with no disguise, smiling when customers called out his name or asked for a photo. Other days he slipped in quietly with his old flannel shirt and well-worn cap, blending in just enough to observe without changing the rhythm of the room. Whether seen or unseen, his presence carried a sense of quiet pride. He didn't hover over Frank. He didn't supervise. He simply watched often from the same seat he'd used the first night he came in disguise. He watched Frank move with renewed confidence. He watched Linda find her strength again. He watched the staff support one another instead of turning on each other. He watched the tip jar fill each day without a single dollar missing. The diner thrived now, not because of promotions or renovated spaces, but because people finally understood what it meant to be a community. Keanu felt something shift inside him each time he visited. Something quiet, something settling. He had built the diner, but Frank had saved it. Each week drew the diner closer to the vision Keanu always hoped for, but never fully achieved until now. He had believed Harbor Light could be a warm place, but Frank was the one who showed everyone what warmth actually looked like. That truth settled in deeper every time Keanu visited. On one particular morning, Keanu slipped into the diner wearing his old disguise. He sat in his familiar booth, hidden behind a newspaper he barely pretended to read. From this quiet vantage point, he watched Frank help a new server arrange her first table setting. Frank's voice was soft and steady as he explained how to greet customers, how to stay patient on busy days, and how to calm a frustrated guest without taking the frustration personally. The young server nodded and smiled with visible relief. She wasn't just being trained, she was being cared for. Moments later, Frank moved to the counter where his daughter was wiping down menus. They whispered something to each other, and she laughed a bright sound that made several customers turn and smile without knowing why. The father she once worried about was now steady and secure, a man with hope instead of fear. Keanu felt a quiet warmth grow in his chest as he watched the two of them work side by side. Frank's daughter carried herself differently now, less guarded, more grounded. She had seen the worst of her father's struggles and now lived in the gentleness of his second chance. Across the diner, customers lined up not just for food, but for greetings from Frank. They asked him about his daughter. They asked about his new house. Some even asked for advice or simply told him they were glad to see him doing well. Frank responded to each person with the same humility he'd always shown, but now a quiet confidence existed beneath it. Even Linda seemed renewed. She managed the staff with firmer boundaries but a softer heart. She trusted Frank's judgment without hesitation. Whenever an issue arose, Frank offered solutions with calm clarity, and Linda nodded, following his lead more often than not. Keanu watched it all with a mixture of pride and grateful humility. He had intervened to stop injustice, but the strength that rebuilt the diner didn't come from him. It came from Frank's steady kindness, the kind that never demanded recognition, but transformed everything it touched. This place was different now, stronger, kinder, more alive. Keanu lowered the newspaper, absorbing the scene like a quiet blessing. The diner thrived not because of profits, but because of people. Because good people finally had room to shine, and Frank, who once worked in silence, now worked in light.